Hi, I'm James, and this is something very different for my channel. Normally, obviously, I'm focusing on repairs of laptops and gaming performance and so on, but I've had something which I've wanted to do for a while, which is to build more of a retro gaming PC, as I've got some games on the shelf that I still want to play that perhaps don't work well on a modern version of Windows, or just don't run well in DOSBox or so on. And so I have purchased this from one of my customers, as I do PC support. They wanted some data recovered and then the PC disposed of, and I said, well, I can do better than that. I can give you a few quid for it as well. Now, I've had a very, very quick look inside. I know it's a sort of slot one with a socket, so running a socket 370 processor, but really beyond that, I haven't gone particularly into it. I know they used to use it for some gaming, so I thought it might be a good place to start. So, if we pop it open, and we're going to take a look at what's inside, and find out if this is going to be something that we're going to want to use going forward. So if we take a look at the machine itself in all of its beige magnificence, and we have 3.5-inch floppy drive, have not used one of those in quite some time, 48 speed CD drive, hopefully that will work. It does just look to be CD, not DVD, which makes sense with the age of the machine. DVD would have been quite expensive at that point, if I can remember correctly. Then looking at the back, so we have graphics card, sound card. They have added in some additional USB. There are a couple USB ports on it, and it is a full ATX mainboard. Power supply is here, which means it's sitting over the processor. Not really the best place for it, but I guess it kept the case more compact. And we do have a modem of some description, which I will probably be taking out because, you know, I've got no use for a modem these days. What I will probably do is have a dig through my box and see if I can find a network card, although whether I really want to be connecting this up to my network at this point, maybe not. So now the thing for us to do is to crack this case open and see what it is we have actually bought. So, looking inside, and so we've got a hard drive in here which is unplugged. That's actually, I unplugged that because I needed to take it out just to try and do some data recovery. And that's why I ended up with this machine. Power supply out of the way. Okay, so what do we have inside? So we've got socket 370 processor on a slot 1 mainboard here. It looks to be a VIA chipset, which is wouldn't be my first choice. You know, a nice 440BX chipset would be ideal. But let's get some of these bits just moved out of the way so we can see. Oh, that is now cable tied to the fan connector. Brilliant. So, what memory do we have? So, our first DIMM is 128 megabytes. Our second DIMM is... doesn't have any markings on it, it's double-sided, but we'll have to see what that is. And another 128 megabytes, CAS3, PC133. So worst case there, we've got two quite nice CAS3, PC133 memory modules for 256 megabytes of RAM. We'll have to see what the other one is. But that's pretty good for this kind of age of system. And then graphics card. So this looks to be, I had done a little bit, yep. So we have on there, and this was one of the reasons I was sort of interested in this machine, is that we have a 3DFX card. So this is, I believe, although it doesn't have the TV out on it, which you'd normally expect to find, I believe this is a Voodoo 3000 card. AGP. So that is a nice basis for a system like this. I may have some other AGP cards kicking around, so I've always got the option to switch what is in here. But yes, that was the sort of main thing I was hoping to find. And then, ooh, a little bit stuck under that rivet there. So we have, still attached to the CD drive, so we have this sound card which is marked crystal. Not one I initially recognised, but we'll see if we can find some details of that online. So what I'm going to do for the minute is just sort of strip this machine down to the minimal pieces. So let's pop out the USB card. So Belkin and a USB card, NEC chip on that, little internal header, and then some rear ones as well. Nice to have. Bit of USB is always helpful these days. And then our final card in here, we have your fairly generic 56k modem, or I assume 56k, but I think that can come out. Probably not bother with that one. So what I'm going to do, things are not actually as bad dust-wise as I anticipated in here. Thought it was going to be a bit horrific. Actually, it's not terrible. So I'm going to get the basics of this machine put back together, and then we'll get them fired up and see what happens. So we've got things plugged in, monitor in, power connected, Voodoo card and sound card reinstalled, and let's see what happens when we try and fire it up. And the answer would be not a great deal. So fan spinning up, but we've got no beeps, no numlock, anything on the keyboard. On the plus side, no sparks or fire, but basically fan spinning up, not going anywhere. Now what I am going to do is swap over the power supply, because I have my suspicions this is a very old power supply, and that's just always a nice easy first place to start. Okay, so new power supply attached. I also had to lift out and just reseat the processor socket, but what we should find, so yes, PC starts up and we've got a QDI BIOS screen, and then we get some beeping. That suggests something funny with the keyboard to me. Okay, so let's switch that off, and no keyboard detected, and check some error. So obviously a flat CR2032 battery. Okay, so our first piece of essential maintenance is we are going to get that battery replaced. So fortunately I, for repair purposes, keep a few of these on the shelves, and so I'm just going to get a little pry tool in there, pop the battery out, and slot in its replacement. I've also dug out a spare PS2 keyboard which I have, so let's fire this up and see where it goes now. Firing it up again. Beautifully installed power supply on the top there, and our now lovely non-matching black keyboard. So we have, again, QDI BIOS, no beeping. And so BIOS obviously all reset to default. Now interestingly, this does let us tweak some of the processor settings. So there is a DRAM frequency option, which because 66 megahertz processor, we can choose 100 or 66 megahertz for the memory. We seem to have some options for the processor. What I'm going to have to do is pull this processor out and find out what it actually is. It was reporting running at 433 megahertz, so presumably that's what. And then we've got our sort of standard features, so just looking through. can adjust memory timings, which I'm just going to leave all as standard for the minute. And tell it we've got a plug and play operating system, which I imagine we will be doing. Integrated peripherals. Okay. So let's just let it restart and then we'll start connecting up some devices. I believe this has Windows 98 installed on it. So yeah, our 16 megabyte Voodoo 3000. Okay, so yeah, we've got default BIOS options, new CPU installed. Okay, F1 to continue. So this is an Advance 5133 board, and this is a Celeron 433. So what I'm probably going to do is strip out that processor and find out what it actually is, and also look through my box to see if I've got some alternatives which I could fit in here. 512 megs of RAM by the looks of it, which is quite nice as well. So obviously that other module was a 256 megabyte module. Okay, so extracting the processor from the SECC edge connector, and what we have here is actually a 8-bit RS370 slot kit, or yeah, slot kit. Now this is really nice. I'd have used 8-bit myself in period. I think I had a BE62 RAID and went from the SECC to chips to socket 370 copper mines, and used the slot kit instead, just as it gave a bit more flexibility on what processors you could install. Now, taking the heatsink off, no thermal paste at all, so yikes. And this appears to just be one of the early Mendocino, I believe it is, Celerons. So let's just extract that from the slot kit. And so on here we can see, if we hold up to the camera, so this is indeed a 433 megahertz chip. So let's get things back in focus. So I don't think we really want to be using that Celeron. That's pretty nasty. But we do have a decent 8-bit slot kit, and we know it works because that processor has been running in it. Now, I do actually have a few options straight off my shelf, which I could look at putting into here. So first of all, we have, so I believe this is, I can't believe I'm going to be annoying here. I can't remember if this is a Klamath, but it is a 300 megahertz Pentium 2. I don't believe this was actually my original Pentium 2. I certainly had one of these, but I think I bought this years later to just to have in a collection. Used to have quite a big CPU collection, which I trimmed down a few years ago, so we have that as an option. And then we have this one here, which is, so this is a Katmai Core Pentium 3 for 50 megahertz. So now I'm also, the draw to that is somewhat strong because I believe that was actually my personal processor from when I upgraded my Pentium 2 to a Pentium 3. And the other option I have here, now this is a no-go as standard because the heatsink is going to be too big and we'd need to find a fan for it. It's going to be too big, it's going to get in the way of the power supply. This slot kit is already basically touching. Actually, no, it would just about fit under there, but so we do have that option. Unfortunately, this board does say it only supports 100 megahertz frontside bus copper mines, but I have a suspicion that the 133s may work, in which case this would be my real one that I want to fit in. So this is one of the 1 gigahertz 133 megahertz, so basically kind of the best of the copper mines if you exclude the 133 the 1.1 and 1.133 gigahertz chips, which I believe got withdrawn. I do also have a couple other chips in my collection which I don't think this board would work with, but first of all we have here a Tualatin, so the sort of 130 nanometer core Pentium 3. So this was effectively the same process as they were building the Northwood Pentium 4s on, but they built a Pentium 3 on that as well. Is it 100? No, 180 nanometer, I believe it was. I will double check that. No, 130. It was 180 for the earlier ones. And then we also have a Pentium 3S. So this is another Tualatin core chip. This one is only 1.133 gigahertz, but that is on a 133 frontside bus, and it has the larger 512 KB of cache. So the same size cache as these, but running at full core speed, whereas these always ran them at half, had all kinds of overclocking issues with the external level 2 cache. So there's a few chips to try here. I may throw the Celeron in just to see if it will boot it, but looking at the compatibility list, I suspect it won't. So I've spent a bit of time the last day or so fiddling with this system, and I've settled on a configuration I'm fairly happy with. Unfortunately, having tried a couple Coppermine CPUs, so the 1 GHz mounted in the socket and a standard slot 1 667 MHz chip, I didn't really have any luck getting these, neither would Post, but I was able to get my old Katmai Core Pentium 3 450 running. So we can see systems up and running. This is actually the Windows 98 install, 2nd edition 98, which was already installed. Doing a bit of searching online, although QDI is long since defunct and their website gone, I was able to find a updated BIOS and successfully update that to the last beta BIOS, which was actually from this millennium, released in 2000, which adds 80GB hard drive support. Probably not something that I'm going to be fitting, but it's good to have it up to date. Unfortunately, although one of the BIOS revisions in between said it added some codes, which I was hoping was microcodes for Coppermine, even after the update to the BIOS, no change there. I've also gone through and found some update, sort of the last official Windows 98 drivers for the Voodoo 3 card, and taken the opportunity to install a few of the games that I wanted to play on this system, sort of as part of the reason why I have built it up, because I have a few titles which I fancy taking a look at again, which just simply don't work well on modern PCs. First of all, if we load up a Windows 98 version of CPU-Z, or CPU-ID, CPU-Z, so this is Vintage Edition. It detects this chip as a Pentium 3 300 MHz, which of course is wrong. It also shows here 450. There was no Pentium 3 300 MHz that I'm aware of, but everything detects correctly, so it identifies the board, chipset, our memory, what is in each slot. So a very handy tool this, and nice that the developer has made a version which still runs on their Windows 98 and the Voodoo 3 card in here. And then looking at some of the titles, so first of all I have what was my my absolute jam back in the day was, I would say probably Grand Prix 2 was my favourite of the series, but I do have my original disc here for Grand Prix 3. And the game is quite nice in that it actually has a graphics calibration on startup, so it runs through different options for the graphics, 4 different presets, and then picks the one that it believes is most suitable. Because this isn't the most powerful possible combination of graphics card and processor, it's detected, recommends running on the Voodoo 3, 640 by 480. Performance when it was running at the higher resolutions was not particularly good, and I've set it just sort of standard BIOS on smoother movement, more detail on the automatic settings. You can go in and tweak these manually if you want to turn things on individually and set a target frame rate. It targets 25.6 as a maximum, which is about as high as the game goes. Also managed to find some USB drivers, found a Windows 98 2nd edition CD, and also got the USB drivers for the mouse. Haven't been able to get flash drives working with it yet, but something for me to look into. and connects up the monitor for sound, which isn't great, but it saves having extra speakers out on my desk. So you can see here, so Grand Prix 3 working quite nicely. CPU occupancy is a little over 100%, but as we get out of the main area on this, that will decrease. I'm going to just pull the sound down a bit because that's going to be loud. And as a big car fan and motorsport fan in general, this was always one of my favourite titles. Playing it with the keyboard not ideal because it doesn't give you a huge amount of control on the steering, because it wants you to sort of follow the racing line. And sort of turn 1 here where everything bunches up and you've got a bit of smoke, there is some slowdown. In real life in '98 it was horrendous rain and a massive pile up with David Coulthard on the first start, but relatively safely through today, bar hitting the wall at Eau Rouge. I am hoping to pick up a compatible USB, in fact game port steering wheel, which I might have a go with on this in a future video if there's any interest in that. But this really was, growing up fan of Formula 1, this was one of my absolute most played games growing up. Speaking of my all-time favourite games as well, Quake III Gold. I do actually have an original day release CD as well, but I bought this separately, and this comes with a pre-patched version of the game. And I know a lot of people always say Unreal Tournament, but for me it was always Quake 3. This is what prompted me to update the 3DFX drivers, because as it was, I think it was lacking OpenGL support from what was pre-installed, so I had to get those installed to get it running. But so we have the demo. I have enabled sort of viewing frame rates, and we'll see. I mean, I used to play this on a GeForce DDR. The Voodoo 3 is a lot less powerful than that, but this is just the defaults for the game, and it does run 30 to 60 frames per second. If you're really a Quake 3 player, you want it capped at a constant 125 frames per second for the long jumping physics. But for a bit, since I'm clearly not going to be competitively playing this anymore, just having it running with sort of rather variable frame rates is fine. And of course we have to fire up The Longest Yard, which was obviously the best map. The funny thing going back to an old system like this is actually almost the immediacy of the Windows 98, considering how old the machine is. Ooh, and this is struggling with the bots. Yes, I think definitely playing with the bots here we need a bit of a CPU boost, because it is struggling just to keep frame rates up with the AI opponents. Oof. Looking just at how the game has run out of the box, so 640 by 480, 16-bit color depth will have to be, let's switch it to vertex lighting, pull down the texture quality a little, and just see if we can improve performance. I think the bots are going to be what's actually kind of hurting things quite badly here. Oh, and we actually killed someone. So reducing that detail there has sped things up somewhat. Jumped out the level again because skills. And this one, another game that I was really keen to actually get this system up and running to play, just because it's, again, not particularly easy to get it running well on modern PCs. There is an HD remake, but the physics aren't quite right in it, particularly on things like Wall Ride. On this level, getting the 5 bells is really hard on the remake, and a lot more natural. And so just to finish up for today, last thing I really want to be doing is there are a couple of stickers on here from the previous owner. Obviously there is more that I would like to do with this machine, and you know, if people would like to see me do more with this on the channel, do let me know. Obviously this isn't what I've typically posted, but I'm just putting some label remover onto here, and we're going to give that a minute to soak in. I do still need to go through and just give the machine a general clean. Considering the age of it, it actually isn't that bad inside in terms of dust, but I will just go through and sort of hoover out down the bottom of the case here. And I also want to go through and probably do a clean install of Windows 98, as this is just the install as I got it. Just to remove some software that is on there that I don't need, and potentially dual boot it with Windows 2000 or Windows XP, just to give me a few more options on what I can play. Having let that soak in, we can now take our scraper and just work off these badges. This one, by the feel of it, might need a little bit extra once it's off, just to clean off the worst of the stickiness, but all fairly simple. This isn't the only sort of project that I've got planned with this. I'm also hoping soon to build a slightly more powerful Pentium 4 based machine. I'm looking for options on graphics cards for this, because I thought I had a GeForce 2 GTS, but that appears to have gone missing at some point. And if you know, if there's interest, I may also look at building a older 486 base system, just to because I'm in a bit of a mood of wanting to revisit some of the machines I used when I was first getting interested in PCs. This one's been a nice start for me because it's been a relatively easy setup, being mostly built, and also being able to incorporate a chip that was actually mine, new, you know, in the 90s, which I've kept over the years for no real reason, so it feels nice to actually be making some use of it. But yeah, it's just sort of finishing touches, trying to get this gunk off. So yeah, if you want to see more of this, let me know in the comments below, and hit subscribe to see more videos as I post them. Thanks for watching.